Next up on the list for basics of the fractals is going to be these percent probable zones, the 10%, 20%, 50%, 80%, as well as these black dashes, which we call clusters. So these clusters are areas that we've previously reversed, the highest or lowest point we got in that wave. So an example would be here. This was the lowest we got on this wave, and then reversed and a cluster was formed. Same thing for the upside. This was the highest we got before reversing, so a cluster was formed there. Same thing right here, highest we got, cluster was formed. Now this can be on any time frame, any wave. You'll just see that marked out as the highest the wave got for that one sequence. So that was the highest we got. Right here was the highest we got, so you can see a cluster over here, and so on. Now these are areas of support and resistance because if we have reversed there before, you can expect support or resistance when we retest that. Now it's not always going to be perfect, but something to keep in mind. Typically, when you have multiple clusters in one area or the cluster is a little bit thicker, it's showing that there's been multiple reversals in that area. An example right now is ES on the 10-wave 15-minute. You can see there's this very large thick cluster here because we've had multiple times where you can see we reversed here, 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 and so on. Now, when you have a lot of blank space or gray space over here with no clusters, that's typically showing there's little support or resistance in this area. And you can see how that played out. This day right here was Friday. You can see how that played out perfectly. So we came down, broke below this 20% odds, which we'll touch on in a second, in this cluster here. We moved lower, had a small little bounce here, came up and retested vector, which we talked about in the previous video. If we got above vector, you start looking for a move back to pivot. But we rejected vector, continued down with all this blank space, and finally found support down at these previously reversal areas or clusters here. So that's the general idea of clusters. Support and resistance based off previous highs and lows or reversal points on each wave. Now we'll talk about the percent probable. You want to get that on your chart, click this button over here, and you can see the 10%, 20%, 50%, and 80% odds come up. What these are showing is when we get a move above or below pivot, 80% of the time do we reach this point, 50% of the time do we reach this point, 20% this point, and 10% this point. You can use this as a bias or confirmation for a trade when you have clusters stacked up in a certain area as well as the 10 or 20% odds. Our odds of continuing higher or lower becomes less and less as we push up higher into these 10%, 20% odds. You can also add on different percent probables. So you can add on like a 5% odds, 2%, 1% if you'd like. That will be in the next video, and we'll also add a PDF on the code needed to add in any of the percent odds you'd like.